So I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be part of this great lineup. I work with Dimitra at the center. If I had to sum up my job, I'm a data nerd at the NHS. And in theory, my talk today is about some work we did. The NHS said to us, what can you tell us about children's mental health in Northeast Scotland? And how did we go about attacking that problem? But I wanted to, that's like basically a red herring. Like I wanted to wrap up those very cool results that we have with the idea that I think you can do phenomenal data science in a way that's good for yourself and good for the world here. Ooh, this is going to drive me bonkers. So I think at least we think, oh, if we want to do really sexy, cool, cutting edge data science, we need to be at one of these megacorps that are objectively terrible places where you shouldn't give them your mind and your effort. So the idea that you can do very cool data science for the government, for children's mental health, to help with the census, to help distribute taxpayer resources. So that happens, and we have a great center that's working on that. Also that methods development or like the latest high processing needs, neural nets. You don't need to be like a stinky dude in a basement who's like working alone under his hoodie. That part of it, that part of data science is maybe 10% of the work. And to get any sort of interesting impact, you need a whole lot around that besides just coding. So I'll tell you a bit about the group that we're running at the center. This is going to drive me bonkers. So we're the Network Data Lab, funded by the Health Foundation. There are 5 partners. We're the Scottish partner here in Aberdeen. You can see us up here in the corner. We're the only Scottish partner. And what the group is basically made up of teams of NHSs, public health, and occasionally university. They tend to be more NHS focused, but funded with grant money as a typical academic project is. Unusually, we didn't apply to the Health Foundation and say, we want to study children's mental health. They said, we're going to give you, right now we have 6 years of funding, and we expect a new result every year. We're going to come up with a new question every year. You need to have the team ready, the data ready, and go out and answer it for us. So I'll tell you about 1 year's work here. And these are their rules. Work fast compared to academics. Linking data, that's our specialty, big data. Making software, fine, write your analytic code basically. The one I love is share everything. So they're funding this, it's taxpayer funded data, it's NHS data. Anything we do, we have to give back quickly and prove it's useful. That's harder, right? But so that's our goal here with our team. And I like this. So I've been in academia a very long time, and I think I got very tired of writing papers that no one read. So you work for like 2.5 years and you do all this work and you do this analysis and you write a 60-page paper with 8 appendices and you have 40 co-authors and you spend £3,000 and you get it published in a journal and nobody reads it. Your mom can't read it. Your boss doesn't have time to read it. Definitely no exec at the NHS is like, oh yes, Appendix 3, very compelling, So for me, I was very attracted to the idea that we could work a bit harder and be judged by a different sort of output without being Facebook, right? We don't have to earn anybody any money. It's not about taxpayer. It's not move fast and break things. It's move fast and be useful. So I'm going to tell you about 1 year project that we just finished. It wasn't just our NHS local here in Northern Scotland, but all 5 sites, so all across the UK. The Health Foundation says, children's mental health, give us a picture of how it is by you. And it was left to us to define the scope of the question we could conceivably answer with the data, and then think about how we could deliver it within a year, which is non-trivial with this sort of high security data, and then think about how we could make it useful. So here's what we did. For all children in Northeast Scotland, it's about 100,000 kids under 18 in any given year. So take all of those 100,000 kids per year for 10 years and gather all their prescriptions. So the beauty of Scotland is all of this data is central, and it's every prescription dispensed in Scotland is kept track of in one data set. So take all the prescriptions for children under 18 in any of these 10 years, and then their outpatient visits. We looked at all of them, but in particular to the specialist mental health services called CAMS. So we said, what prescription drugs are kids taking for mental health conditions? So step one, what's a mental health drug, right? So there's ways you can sort of look these things up. And then think about not only who's visiting, say, psychiatrists up at the hospital for outpatient care, but who was referred to these psychiatrists and either accepted or rejected. Is this the picture of mental health for children? Right? But this is what's visible to us and visible to the Scottish government. So that's the picture we could create. So it's important to talk about how amazing it is we can link all this data and what we're completely blind to. So anything that happens in schools, we can't see. So I have like 5 slides of the results here. Mental health prescriptions doubled. So if anything, the population size shrunk slightly over time. So these are prescriptions for anyone under 18 in NHS Grampian. So it's about 100,000 kids. Grampian is about 500,000 people. And in the 10 years of the study, this is for people under 24. It doesn't matter. So mental health drug prescribing has doubled. And what's sort of interesting is it's not that it was flat and then, oh my God, COVID, right? That in general, there's a tiny dip there in 2020, but in general, it's increasing over time fairly steadily. So this is our only way, looking at NHS data, of getting a sense of the need. So GPs don't share their data. We're not sure who's getting seen at GPs just for concerns. This is the only proxy we have for general primary care type mental health issues. So who's getting these prescriptions? This is the population broken out into age ranges. So these are kids under 5. There's not a whole lot of prescriptions for kids under 5. And as they go through school, it goes up a bit. When they turn 18, prescribing spikes. And you're like, oh my God, it's a mental health crisis for 18-year-olds. Not really. They try not to treat kids with medication as much as possible for under 18s. But once you turn 18, the first step is often medication, and that's definitely shown here in the graphs. So if we wanted to do a dive into what is being prescribed to whom, this is the same age groups, and just looking at their total prescriptions here, what are they being prescribed? So for the little ones, what they're mostly getting is melatonin to help them sleep, which the way the drugs are categorized, that's considered a mental health drug. But this big mid-blue color is ADHD medication. So the vast majority of prescriptions for young kids is ADHD medication at Grampian. And that dwindles very rapidly as antidepressant prescribing grows. So little kids, their mental health conditions, as we judge them simply by looking at prescriptions, is for ADHD. And it changes pretty rapidly into puberty, into depression. Huge difference in gender here. So if you look at all the prescriptions for the kids who are under something like 14, the vast majority of prescriptions go to boys. And it's not until girls hit about 14 when prescribing to girls spikes. And so that gender difference maps with that drug type difference. If you said mental health, the average patient, judging by medication, for younger kids, it's a boy with ADHD. For older kids, it's a girl with depression. So huge differences in who's getting what. When you say this to the clinicians, they're not too surprised. Like they know that's what this looks like for their patients. But when you paint a picture this simple, this isn't high-tech data science, right? Like no standard errors were calculated here. We're just aggregating, but the signal's sort of overwhelming. And it does tell a message here. So we then went and looked at referrals to those specialists. So who is getting referred beyond the GP for care? And these are the same age groups And just looking at who's getting referred over time, and it does not look like the prescribing trend, which was ticking up. It looks really different than the prescribing trends. Younger kids are getting referred less and less to the specialists, and older kids are getting referred more. There actually is a fairly decent COVID spike there. So you have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about who's getting that specialist care. And this is a big one for us. We looked at whose referrals to specialists, to the psych services, were getting rejected. And there was a pretty steady rejection rate of about 20% of all referrals, equal between boys and girls. And that just started to diverge really rapidly. So nothing changed in terms of girls' referrals basically until COVID, when there was a bit of overwhelm in the service. And then girls' referrals went up, but boys are getting turned down more and more. This does not mean these boys aren't getting care, right? But it does mean they're not getting care at that acute level of the outpatient services at the hospital. And that's all we can see. We can see their prescriptions, we can see their acute care, and we can't see where they're going when they get rejected from CAMS and referred on. So this is my punchy summary of a year's worth of work from a huge team. Mental health care need is rising. Specialist service hasn't grown. So the size, the number of psych people in CAMS is the same as it was before this steady uptick in prescribing. There's a bottleneck in who can get treated when you have higher need and a static service size. And whether actively or not, we can show that the number of girls who are getting into treatment at CAMS has gone up proportionally. The average age has gone up as well. And younger boys are disproportionately rejected if you're just thinking about simple equality. This is interesting and sort of shocking if you're like, oh my God, when you show this, people are like, what about the boys? It's important, right? But it's also a factor of we're measuring what we value here. These boys aren't being like thrown into the woods. They're getting care elsewhere. And that's the first thing CAMS said to us. Where do these boys go? These boys we reject, they get redirected. Where do they go? We couldn't tell them, right? So we can't see school services. The data isn't available. It's not analytic failure. It's structural limitations. So we can't see what care they're getting at school. We can't see any care in the private sector, obviously. And presenting this data to a child well-being group, we had a police officer there who said, oh, I think we're getting your boys who are having mental health troubles, right? So CAMS service is good at treating older girls with complex internalizing conditions. They're not there to treat behavioral issues in young boys or perhaps violence issues in older boys. So the picture's sort of overwhelming when you look at these two slices, but it also, we give back to the providers there. Here's what we can't tell you. Here's the limits of the data. So we presented this to the CAMS team. We designed this research in collaboration with the CAMS team and with a whole bunch of people at the NHS. And I was really pleased that after our first presentation of the draft results, one of the clinical directors there said, okay, yes, we're going to do 2 new hires. I think I could get those adverts out this week. Do you know, so the idea that they hadn't seen that rising need in prescribing, that doesn't come across their desk. So just showing them that simple aggregate number per month over time was impactful for them. They also didn't quite realize how much their characteristic of their average treated patient had changed over 10 years. When you're in the muck, I think day to day, you don't have a picture of population evolution in your services. And the other thing we did was point out how much of this redirected work is being put back to schools. So the amount of mental health and well-being care that happens for your teachers who should be teaching literacy is enormous. And because they're bosses, they just handle it. So making it clear to the powers that be, everyone doesn't need to be treated by psychiatrists at CAMS, right? There's a whole bunch of preventative family well-being work we can do. way before it gets that serious. So did we change anything in schools? We didn't, but we did shine the light on that we couldn't track those kids getting redirected. But we hear from the ground that they're showing up at schools, and schools are handling a huge amount of sort of mental health stuff that they weren't designed to do nor funded. So this is me. This is me being happy about my job, right? So it's not Facebook. I'm like lazy and kind of like squeamish. I'm not a primary school teacher, but at least the work we do can do a little bit of good, right? So it's not super complicated statistics. I didn't actually help any individual little kid, but I think we do, if we tell the stories right, we can have an impact with this type of work without much trouble, frankly. So this is my main point, I think. The hard part here is absolutely not the data science, right? Like you can do these joins, it's like one line of code, right? You can do your little linear regression, that's one more line. It is so easy. It has nothing to do with the hard part here. So what's tricky for the work we do? It's hard to get the data. It's really hard to get the data, right? So even within the NHS, they don't spend much time aggregating this data for themselves. So part of what we had to do was to convince them to let us have a huge pile of data and work on it for a year, which to them is a comically long time. So we could never have done anything without our Dash service here. So these people don't get the credit, so nothing would happen without the data. And analysts, data scientists, people can't touch the data without going through a service that brokers anonymized patient records. So these are all over Scotland. We couldn't do anything without them. The other thing that I think doesn't get talked about enough is the art of presenting the graph, right? I showed you the simplest graph and there was like a conclusion across the top. Nobody wants like a 50-page appendix with all the sensitivity analyses. I assume I am talking to a busy executive who's driving and I'm showing him the graph and I'm trying to make my point, right? So it's persuasion to the CAMS doctors to let us look at their data. They're terrified. They don't want any spotlights on their service. They're very busy. Would I please go away, right? It's persuasion about presenting the data to make a positive case for change instead of just data panic. It's persuasion about funding. It's persuasion about what to focus on. So I think there's the art there is way, way harder to both teach and learn and achieve than running a regression. And I stole this, the modern data scientist, right? Math and stats, programming and database, that you can like learn that off the internet. Like somehow I'm not at all concerned about this stuff. It's these soft skills, which is the worst name in the world for it. But how do you solve these problems? How are you curious about the data and the communications that I think is the hard part? And if I may, I think women sort of excel at. So this is my last plea. So it's not just us. I think there's a tremendous number of really interesting jobs. So the Scottish Census comes out next year. That is a data scientist's dream. So how do you analyze that? And then how do you serve it to the public? I think this is a phenomenal to the public and also to the people who are moving money around. So there's all sorts of interesting work that goes on within government. So Aberdeen has a health determinants research collaboration. That's with the local city council, all of the city data, education, social care. It's with the NHS and it's with the universities in Aberdeen. £5 million for 5 years of data science work, basically, with all those soft skills wrapped around there, ethics, governance, and then impact afterwards. Our network data lab is funded for another 3 years. And so these are the jobs, my friends. So between the Center for Health Data Science looking for a prof to help run the place, a few research fellows, I think maybe both those posts filled. They're interestingly not at the university. They're at the local council. The NHS has 2 senior analyst posts that should be advertised shortly. and the city itself is looking for a data engineer. It's not Facebook money, but it's not Facebook work either. So just to testify that I think I really enjoy it, and I think it's good work and enjoyable work. And I'm always happy to chat for the whole rest of the day about anything we're up to and jobs we have available. So thank you.